Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
My name in the silence. Have you ever heard someone whisper your name so clearly that you answered, only to realize you were completely alone? What if that voice knew exactly when your heart was breaking? What if it came back night after night, always at the same hour, inside a quiet American home where nothing seemed wrong from the outside? I never believed stories like this. I laughed at them. Until the night my own name drifted through the darkness, soft enough to sound loving, yet chilling enough to steal every bit of sleep I had. That was the moment my ordinary life quietly began to fall apart. My name is Emma, and this is not a ghost story. At least, that is what I keep telling myself. I live with my husband and our 2 children in a peaceful neighborhood in the United States. Our mornings are busy with school lunches, work meetings, forgotten backpacks, and the comforting smell of fresh coffee. If you had driven past our house, you would have seen an ordinary family smiling, waving to neighbors, and living what many people would call the American dream. But photographs never capture silence. Every evening, after the dishes were clean and the house finally became quiet, I found myself sitting alone in the living room with a cup of warm tea. To relax, I had started listening to slow English stories. The gentle voice helped me improve my listening little by little. I repeated simple sentences, sometimes whispering them back to myself. Take a deep breath. Everything will be okay. I am here. The practice felt peaceful, and for a while, it became my favorite part of the day. Then something changed. One Tuesday night, just after 11, I removed my headphones because I thought I heard someone speaking behind me. Emma. It was barely louder than a breath. I turned around immediately. No one. The hallway was empty. My children were asleep. My husband was already in bed upstairs. Every window was locked. Even the air inside the house felt perfectly still. I convinced myself that my mind had mixed the English recording with the sounds around me. Scientists often explain that a tired brain can sometimes misinterpret quiet noises, especially after stress or poor sleep. That explanation made sense, so I smiled at myself and went upstairs. The next night, it happened again. This time, there were no headphones. Emma. The whisper floated through the darkness as if someone were standing only a few feet away. I searched every room. Nothing. I checked the security cameras on my phone. Nothing unusual. I even laughed nervously because I did not want fear to become stronger than logic. Living in America teaches you to check the facts before believing the worst. I told myself I simply needed more rest, less caffeine, and fewer late nights. Yet something inside me refused to believe that simple answer. Over the following week, the whisper always came when I was alone. Never when my husband was beside me. Never when the children were awake. Always when the house became completely silent. The strange part was not that someone called my name. The strange part was how familiar the voice sounded. It did not feel like a stranger. It sounded like someone who knew me. Someone who understood every secret I had been hiding behind my polite smile. I stopped telling myself that everything was fine. Because the truth was, everything was not fine. There were conversations my husband and I kept postponing. There were worries I buried so deeply that even I pretended they no longer existed. I had become so busy taking care of everyone else that I no longer recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. And somehow, that whisper seemed to know it before I did. Then, on a rainy Friday night, I finally decided to answer the voice. The moment I whispered, "Who's calling me?" something happened that I still cannot fully explain. And it changed the way I looked at my family, my marriage, and even myself forever. Everything looked perfect. The most dangerous lies are not the ones other people tell you. They are the ones you repeat to yourself every single day. I'm fine. I'm just tired. Nothing is wrong. I whispered those words so often that I almost believed them. But the mysterious voice calling my name never returned while my family was around. It waited patiently until I was completely alone, as if it knew there was a version of me that existed only after everyone else had gone to sleep. And one ordinary evening, that invisible line between reality and something I could no longer explain quietly disappeared. From the outside, my life looked almost perfect. Our home was warm, our children laughed through the hallways, and my husband and I still shared dinner nearly every night. Weekends were filled with grocery shopping, soccer practice, neighborhood barbecues, and long walks through our local park. Friends often joked that our family looked like one of those smiling holiday cards people mail every December across America. I smiled every time they said it, but smiles are surprisingly easy to wear. They are much harder to live inside. There was one habit no one knew about. Every night after everyone went to bed, I sat in the same corner of the living room with a small blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I opened a playlist of slow English reading stories, lowered the volume, and listened sentence by sentence. It was never about becoming perfect at English. It was about slowing my racing thoughts. I quietly repeated simple phrases. Today is enough. I choose peace. Tomorrow is a new day. Speaking slowly somehow made my breathing slower too. My husband once asked why I listened to the same gentle recordings over and over. I laughed and said, "It helps my English." That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. The stories had become my escape from conversations I didn't know how to start. Instead of telling my husband I felt emotionally exhausted, I pressed play. Instead of admitting I sometimes felt invisible even inside my own home, I repeated another English sentence. It was easier to practice pronunciation than vulnerability. Looking back, I wonder if silence has a sound. Because every night, just before the whisper appeared, the house became unnaturally quiet. The refrigerator stopped humming. The heating system seemed to pause. Even the distant traffic outside faded into nothing. It felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. Then, Emma. Soft. Calm. Almost comforting. I froze without realizing it. This time I didn't search every room. Instead, I listened. The voice wasn't frightening anymore. It sounded concerned. As if someone had been trying to reach me for a very long time. The next morning I told myself I was imagining everything. Modern life in the United States can leave anyone mentally exhausted. Stress, lack of sleep, endless notifications, family responsibilities, they all affect the brain in surprising ways. Studies have shown that prolonged stress can heighten awareness of ordinary sounds or even cause the brain to briefly misinterpret them. That explanation should have reassured me. Instead, it made me more curious. Because if this was only stress, why did the whisper always say my name with exactly the same gentle tone? Why did it never interrupt my English practice? And why did it always come immediately after I repeated one particular sentence? A few nights later, I accidentally discovered something I wish I had noticed much sooner. I paused the audio halfway through a story. The room was completely silent. No headphones. No recording. No sound at all. Then, from somewhere behind me, clear enough to make every hair on my arm stand up, I heard the exact same voice whisper one sentence I had never spoken aloud. Turn around, slowly. I did. And what I saw standing at the end of the hallway made my heart stop. The second whisper. If I told you I saw a shadow standing at the end of my hallway, you might think this story is about ghosts. It isn't. What terrified me wasn't what I saw. It was what disappeared the moment I blinked. I stood frozen in my own home, my heartbeat echoing louder than my thoughts, wondering if fear could actually create things that looked completely real. That single moment forced me to question not only my eyes, but also my marriage, my mind, and every quiet night I had ignored. The hallway was empty. I blinked again. Nothing. The faint shape I thought I had seen was gone, leaving only the soft glow of a nightlight near my children's bedrooms. I slowly walked forward, touching the wall with trembling fingers, almost embarrassed by my own fear. Every door was closed exactly as I had left it. My husband was asleep upstairs. The children hadn't moved. Even our family dog remained curled up on his bed, completely calm. If there had been someone inside the house, he would have barked immediately. I returned to the living room trying to convince myself that my tired eyes had played a trick on me. But then I noticed something strange. My phone screen was still lit. The slow English reading lesson I had been listening to had automatically replayed from the beginning. The narrator spoke gently, listen carefully. Sometimes the quietest voice is the one you need most. I repeated the sentence aloud to practice my pronunciation. Sometimes the quietest voice is the one you need most. It sounded peaceful, almost comforting. Then another voice answered. Exactly. I dropped my phone onto the couch. That voice was not part of the recording. It came from somewhere behind me. I spun around so quickly that my tea spilled across the floor. Nothing. Again. There was absolutely nothing. For the first time, I wasn't only frightened. I was confused. The following morning, I made an appointment with my family doctor. Living in the United States teaches you something important. When something unusual keeps happening, don't ignore it. Rule out medical causes first. Stress, anxiety, lack of sleep, and emotional overload can affect the brain in surprising ways. My doctor listened carefully, asked about my sleeping habits, my work schedule, and whether anything emotionally difficult had happened recently. I answered every question. Except one. She asked if everything at home was okay. I smiled automatically. Everything is fine. The words came out so naturally that even I almost believed them. Driving home, I realized something uncomfortable. I had been saying I'm fine for months. Not because it was true. Because it was easier than explaining the truth. The truth was that my husband and I hadn't argued much anymore. We had simply stopped talking about anything important. We discussed bills, schedules, school events, groceries. But we no longer talked about dreams, fears, disappointments, or the quiet loneliness that can grow between two people even while they share the same bed. That evening, I watched him laughing with our children over dinner. He looked happy. They looked happy. So why did I feel invisible? Later that night, I returned to my usual chair in the living room. I hesitated before pressing play on another English story. Part of me wanted to stop listening forever. Instead, I whispered a simple sentence. I am ready. It was meant as English practice. Nothing more. The room became perfectly silent again. Then the whisper returned. This time it didn't only say my name. Emma, he doesn't hear you anymore. My entire body went cold. Before I could breathe, footsteps slowly creaked across the second floor. My husband was supposed to be asleep. But someone or something was now walking toward the top of the stairs. The secret I never shared. The footsteps stopped halfway down the stairs, and so did my breathing. If someone had asked me that night whether I believed fear could make a person hear voices, I would have said yes. But could fear make someone else wake up at the exact moment a whisper warned me? That question stayed with me long after the house became quiet again. Looking back now, I realize the most frightening sound in my home was never the whisper. It was everything my husband and I had stopped saying to each other. I slowly looked toward the staircase, expecting to see my husband. No one was there. The wooden steps were empty, illuminated only by the soft light from the kitchen. I called his name. No answer. A few seconds later, I heard our bedroom door upstairs open. My husband appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. Emma? Why are you still awake? His voice sounded sleepy, completely normal. I stared at him. Weren't you just walking downstairs? He frowned. I've been in bed the whole time. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled gently. You've been staying up too late again. I forced myself to smile back. Maybe he was right. Maybe exhaustion was slowly stealing my peace. The next morning, life returned to its usual rhythm. Breakfast. School drop-off. Grocery shopping. Laundry. Video meetings. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. That was the strange thing about emotional pain. It rarely announces itself. It hides inside routine so well that even the people living beside you may never notice it. That afternoon, while folding clothes, I found one of my old notebooks. Inside were pages where I had practiced simple English sentences months earlier. I feel happy. My family is wonderful. I am grateful. Each sentence was written carefully, over and over. Then I reached a page I didn't remember writing. The handwriting was mine. But the sentence felt painfully honest. I don't know how to tell him I'm lonely. I sat on the floor holding the notebook. Tears came before I realized I was crying. Somewhere between raising children, paying bills, helping everyone else, and trying to be strong every day, I had quietly disappeared from my own life. That evening my husband asked if everything was okay. Without thinking, I answered exactly as always. I'm fine. He nodded. Conversation ended. It wasn't because he didn't care. It was because I never opened the door. Researchers often explain that emotional suppression can increase stress, reduce sleep quality, and even make ordinary experiences feel unusually intense. The brain isn't only processing what we say. It's constantly processing what we refuse to say. I didn't need another scientific article to understand that anymore. I was living it. Later that night, I returned to the living room with my headphones. I almost turned the English lesson off. Instead, I pressed play. The narrator slowly said, "Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes." I repeated it softly. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. The words lingered in the quiet room. Then the whisper answered for the first time with an entire sentence. Then why haven't you told him? I closed my eyes. Instead of running, I whispered back. What do you want from me? Silence. Several long seconds passed. Then I heard something that made my heart race faster than ever before. Not another whisper. A child crying. It wasn't coming from upstairs. It wasn't coming from outside. The sound came from the baby monitor sitting on the kitchen counter. I rushed toward it, expecting one of my children to be awake. The screen showed both of them sleeping peacefully. Yet through the speaker, between soft bursts of static, I heard a little girl's voice quietly say my name. Mom. My blood turned cold. Because my children were both asleep. And neither of them had ever called me that way. Following the voice. What would you do if your child's voice came through a baby monitor, while your child was fast asleep right in front of you? Would you run? Would you call the police? Or would you finally admit that something far more unsettling had been happening inside your own life long before the whispers began? I didn't know it then, but the next decision I made would uncover a truth that was both terrifying and strangely beautiful. The voice was leading me somewhere, but not where I expected. I grabbed the baby monitor with shaking hands and hurried upstairs. My daughter was sleeping peacefully, curled beneath her favorite blanket. My son hadn't moved either. Their breathing was slow and steady. I stood beside their beds for several minutes, listening carefully. Nothing. No crying. No whisper. No movement. The monitor suddenly became silent again, as if it had never made a sound. I checked its battery. I checked the wireless connection. I even searched online for reports of baby monitors picking up nearby signals. Living in the United States, I knew electronic interference wasn't impossible. Some older devices could occasionally receive unexpected audio. The explanation felt logical enough to calm me, for about 5 minutes. Because deep inside, I already knew something didn't fit. The little girl's voice hadn't simply called for Mom. She had spoken with emotion. Almost as if she wanted me to notice something I had been avoiding. The following afternoon, while driving home after picking up groceries, I turned off the radio and let the silence fill the car. For weeks I had feared silence. Now I wanted to hear it. At a red light, I quietly practiced one sentence from the slow English reading lesson I had listened to the night before. I am listening. I repeated it once more. I am listening. The words sounded simple. Peaceful. Almost like a promise. For the rest of the drive, nothing unusual happened. No whisper. No strange feeling. For the first time in days, I smiled. Maybe facing my fear instead of running from it had changed something. That evening, after dinner, my husband asked if I wanted to watch a movie with him. Normally I would have said yes without thinking. Instead, I looked at him carefully. There were tiny things I had stopped noticing over the years, the tiredness around his eyes. The way he always waited for me to finish speaking before answering, the quiet concern hidden behind his smile. Maybe he had been carrying something too. Maybe we had both become experts at pretending. After the children went to bed, I didn't put on my headphones. I simply sat in the living room. The clock reached 11. The familiar silence slowly settled over the house. I took a deep breath. I'm here, I whispered. Nothing happened. Several minutes passed. Then I heard my name again. Not behind me. Not upstairs. This time the voice came from inside the dark reflection of the living room window. Emma. I slowly looked toward the glass. Instead of seeing only my own reflection, I noticed something unsettling. My reflection wasn't moving exactly when I moved. It lagged behind by a heartbeat. I froze. The reflection slowly lifted its head. I hadn't moved. Then, with heartbreaking gentleness, the woman in the window looked directly into my eyes. She looked exactly like me. Only older. More tired. She quietly whispered one sentence. You've been trying to save everyone except yourself. Tears filled my eyes before I even understood why. When I blinked, the reflection became normal again. No mysterious woman. Only me. Only my own exhausted face staring back through the glass. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote something I had never allowed myself to write before. I don't think the voice wants to hurt me. For the first time, another possibility entered my mind. What if every whisper had been pointing toward the same hidden truth? What if the person calling my name wasn't outside my house, but inside a part of me I had abandoned years ago? The next morning, while cleaning a drawer in our bedroom, I found a folded letter with my own handwriting. I had no memory of writing it. Across the front were just 7 words. Open only when you hear your name. The truth behind fear. What if the letter you don't remember writing knows exactly what you're about to discover? I stared at those 7 words for nearly a full minute, unable to move. My own handwriting. My own bedroom. My own name. Yet I had absolutely no memory of putting that letter there. The whispers had frightened me for weeks, but this was different. This wasn't a strange sound in the dark. This was proof that something inside my own life had been trying to get my attention long before I was willing to listen. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. Inside, there was only one short paragraph. If you're reading this, it means you finally stopped running. The voice isn't here to scare you. It's here because you've forgotten someone important. There was no signature. Just one sentence written at the bottom. Look in the mirror before you look anywhere else. I immediately checked the date. There wasn't one. I turned the paper over again and again, hoping another clue would appear. Nothing. For several minutes I simply sat on the edge of the bed, trying to remember writing those words. The harder I tried, the more frustrated I became. Memory is strange. Neuroscientists have found that chronic stress and emotional overload can affect how we store and retrieve memories. Sometimes we don't actually lose them. We simply stop noticing parts of ourselves while trying to survive busy lives. That idea stayed with me longer than I expected. The rest of the day felt unusually quiet. No whispers. No mysterious sounds. Just ordinary life. I folded laundry, answered work emails, helped my children with homework, and smiled through conversations that suddenly felt more meaningful than they had in months. Every ordinary moment now carried one unsettling question. Who had I forgotten? That evening I decided not to search for supernatural answers anymore. Instead, I searched for honest ones. I made myself a cup of tea, opened another slow English reading lesson, and listened to the narrator speak one sentence slowly. Be kind to yourself. I repeated it. Again. Then once more. The sentence sounded simple, but something about it broke through the wall I had built around myself. I realized I could easily comfort my children. I could encourage my husband after a difficult day. I could patiently help friends when they struggled. But I had completely forgotten how to speak kindly to myself. Maybe that was what the letter meant. Maybe that was why the whisper always sounded familiar. Around 11 that night, I walked toward the bathroom mirror instead of hiding from it. I switched on the light and looked directly into my own eyes. I expected nothing. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then I noticed something surprising. Not another figure. Not another ghostly reflection. Just myself. Only this time, I truly looked. The tired smile. The sleepless eyes. The woman who had spent years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect employee, while quietly convincing herself that her own emotions could wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow had become months. Months had become years. Without realizing it, I whispered the same English sentence one last time. Be kind to yourself. And for the first time since all of this began, the mysterious voice answered without frightening me. I've been waiting. The words didn't echo through the room. They seemed to rise gently from somewhere deep inside me. Suddenly everything became painfully clear. The whispers had never appeared when I was laughing with my children. They never interrupted joyful moments. They only came when I buried my feelings beneath silence. Tears rolled down my face. Not because I was afraid anymore. Because I finally understood that fear had been wearing the mask of a messenger. Just as I reached for the bathroom light switch, my phone vibrated on the counter. A security camera notification appeared across the screen. Motion detected. Front porch. 11:03 p.m. My heart skipped a beat. I opened the live camera feed. A woman was standing outside my front door. She wasn't moving. She wasn't knocking. She was simply staring directly into the camera. And when she slowly lifted her face toward the lens, she looked exactly like me. One honest conversation. The woman outside my front door vanished before I could even blink. I replayed the security footage once, twice. Then 10 more times. Nothing. The motion alert was still there. The timestamp was real. But the video showed only an empty porch, gently illuminated by the porch light and a cold American autumn night. If I had imagined her, why had the security system detected movement? And if I hadn't imagined her, then who had been standing there wearing my face? I didn't wake my husband. For several minutes, I simply stood by the window, looking at the quiet street. A delivery truck passed in the distance. A neighbor's porch light switched off. Everything appeared completely normal, almost mocking the storm inside my mind. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of hearing the whisper, I heard my own breathing. Fast. Shallow. Uneven. For the first time since this strange journey began, I realized I wasn't afraid of the voice anymore. I was afraid of the truth it had been leading me toward. The next morning, while making pancakes for the children, I accidentally burned the first batch. My daughter laughed and said, "Mom, you're thinking too much again." Thinking too much. Children often notice what adults carefully ignore. After everyone left the kitchen, I looked at the burned pancake and quietly smiled. It wasn't really about breakfast. It was about me living everywhere except in the present moment. That afternoon I opened another slow English reading lesson while folding laundry. The narrator slowly said, "Honesty begins with one simple sentence." I repeated it softly. Honesty begins with one simple sentence. The words stayed with me all day. When my husband came home from work, I almost repeated my usual answer. "Everything's fine." Instead, I stopped myself. "I need to tell you something." He immediately looked concerned. We sat together on the back patio while the evening sun disappeared behind the trees. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I surprised both of us by saying the one sentence I had avoided for years. "I don't think I've been happy, and I don't think I've told you." He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He simply listened. That silence felt completely different from the silence that had haunted our house. This one felt safe. I told him about the loneliness I couldn't explain. About pretending to be strong. About listening to slow English stories every night because they were the only moments when I allowed my mind to slow down. I even told him about the whispers. To my surprise, he didn't laugh. Instead, he lowered his eyes. "I thought you stopped talking because of me," he admitted quietly. "So I stopped asking questions because I didn't want to make things worse." Those words shattered something inside me. For months, we had both been protecting each other with silence. Neither of us realized silence had become the problem. Psychologists often describe emotional distance as something that grows gradually. Not through dramatic arguments but through thousands of conversations that never happen. Listening without interrupting, validating feelings, and speaking honestly are among the healthiest ways couples rebuild trust. Sitting there beside my husband, I wasn't thinking about research anymore. I was living it. As darkness settled over our backyard, I noticed something extraordinary. For the first time in weeks, there was no whisper. No strange feeling. No unexplained fear. The quiet finally felt peaceful. My husband reached for my hand. "I miss you," he said. 3 simple words. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed to hear them. That night, before going to bed, I walked past the living room where everything had started. I smiled toward the empty chair where I had spent so many lonely evenings. Then my phone vibrated. Another security camera notification. This time it wasn't the front porch. It was the backyard. I opened the live feed expecting another false alarm. Instead, I saw my daughter standing barefoot in the grass beneath the moonlight. She appeared to be asleep. And just before the screen went black, she slowly looked toward the camera and whispered in a voice that definitely wasn't hers. She finally heard us. Learning to live again. I ran toward the backyard before I even realized I was moving. Every terrifying possibility flashed through my mind at once. Was my daughter sleepwalking? Had someone entered our yard? Or had the mysterious voice somehow found its way to the person I loved most? But nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered next. Because the greatest mystery waiting for me wasn't hidden in the darkness outside my home. It had been quietly growing inside our family for years, waiting for one honest moment to finally come into the light. I threw open the back door. Cold night air rushed across my face. The backyard was completely empty. No footprints. No movement. Only the gentle sound of leaves swaying in the trees. My heart pounded as I hurried upstairs to my daughter's room. She was asleep exactly where she had been before. Her favorite stuffed rabbit rested beside her. She hadn't moved an inch. I looked back at the security camera footage. The screen now showed nothing unusual. No child. No whisper. No figure in the yard. Only an empty lawn beneath the moon. I should have been terrified. Instead, something unexpected happened. I felt calm. Not because I had solved the mystery. Because I finally understood that every frightening moment had pushed me toward the same destination. To stop pretending. The next morning, I made breakfast with my husband instead of rushing through another busy day. We laughed when the pancakes came out uneven. The children joked about who had made the funniest looking one. It was such an ordinary family moment, but somehow it felt extraordinary. For weeks I had been searching every hallway, every window, every security camera for answers. The answers had been sitting around my own kitchen table. That evening I returned to my favorite chair in the living room. The headphones were still there. So was my notebook. I pressed play on another slow English reading lesson. The narrator slowly said, "Every new beginning starts with one small step." I smiled and repeated the sentence. Every new beginning starts with one small step. This time I wasn't practicing only my English. I was practicing a different way of living. Instead of hiding my feelings, I began speaking them. Instead of carrying every responsibility alone, I asked my husband for help. Instead of believing I had to be perfect for my family, I allowed them to see the real me. Psychologists often explain that small daily habits can gradually reshape emotional well-being. Honest conversations, better sleep, mindful breathing, and moments of genuine connection strengthen resilience far more effectively than pretending everything is fine. I didn't need dramatic life changes. I needed consistent, honest ones. Days passed. Then another week. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. No whisper. No mysterious voice. No impossible reflections. The house finally sounded like a home again. Even my children noticed the difference. "Mom," my son said one afternoon, "you smile more now." I hadn't realized he was watching. Children notice healing almost as quickly as they notice pain. One quiet Sunday evening, my husband and I sat together on the front porch watching the sunset. We didn't say very much. We didn't need to. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. Full of trust. Full of peace. Full of everything we had almost lost. As the last light disappeared behind the trees, I quietly whispered one final English sentence to myself. I am home. The words felt different now. Not because of the house. Because I had finally returned to myself. Just then my phone vibrated one last time. Another security camera notification. I smiled, expecting another harmless motion alert. But when I opened the app, every camera around the house was working perfectly except one. The living room camera. The screen was completely black. Then, slowly, white letters appeared across the display. One truth remains. A second later, the screen returned to normal as if nothing had happened. I stared at it in complete silence. Because deep inside, I knew the whispers were over. But the final answer had not yet been revealed. Who was calling me? The words on my security camera disappeared after only 3 seconds, but they stayed in my mind for weeks. One truth remains. I couldn't stop asking myself the same question that had started this entire journey. Who had been calling my name? Was it fear? Was it stress? Was it something my exhausted mind had created? Or had every whisper been leading me toward one final truth that I still wasn't ready to face? What happened next finally answered that question, but not in the way I expected. The following Monday morning felt surprisingly ordinary. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows while my children argued over cereal. My husband searched for his car keys, and I laughed harder than I had in months. Life hadn't become perfect overnight, but something inside me had become lighter. The strange whispers had completely stopped. The unsettling silence that once filled every corner of our home had been replaced by familiar sounds I had taken for granted for far too long. The dishwasher humming, birds outside the window, my daughter's laughter drifting down the hallway. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I returned to the living room one more time. Not because I expected another whisper. Because I wanted to thank the quiet. I placed my headphones on the table and opened one last slow English reading lesson. The narrator spoke slowly. Every ending is the beginning of understanding. I smiled and repeated the sentence aloud. Every ending is the beginning of understanding. This time, I wasn't practicing pronunciation. I was listening to the meaning. For several peaceful minutes, nothing happened. No mysterious sounds. No unexplained shadows. Only the comforting rhythm of my own breathing. Then my eyes wandered toward the bookshelf. Something caught my attention. It was a family photograph taken almost 2 years earlier. We were all smiling. My husband had one arm around me. The children were laughing. I remembered that day clearly. What I didn't remember was how happy I had looked. I picked up the frame and noticed a folded piece of paper tucked behind it. My heartbeat quickened. Another letter. This one was different. Across the front, in my own handwriting, were 4 simple words. Never stop listening. I unfolded it carefully. Inside, I found several sentences I had written during one of the busiest seasons of my life. If I ever become too busy to hear my own heart, I hope something wakes me up. I hope I remember that my family doesn't need a perfect version of me. They only need the real me. If I forget that, I hope someone calls my name. I stopped reading. Tears quietly rolled down my face. There was no mystery anymore. No hidden stranger. No supernatural visitor. Months earlier, during a difficult period I had almost forgotten, I had written those words to my future self. Then I had buried them. Just as I had buried my emotions. Psychologists often describe this as emotional disconnection. Under prolonged stress, people can become so focused on responsibilities that they gradually lose touch with their own emotional needs. Recovery doesn't always begin with a dramatic breakthrough. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as paying attention, speaking honestly, and allowing yourself to be heard. Looking back, the whispers had become a symbol of everything I had refused to hear inside myself. I closed my notebook and whispered one final English sentence. I hear you now. The room remained completely silent. No answer came. None was needed. For the first time since this strange story began, I understood that the voice had never asked me to be afraid. It had asked me to wake up. To return to my marriage. To return to my children. To return to myself. I stood and walked toward the front window. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful beneath a sky filled with stars. I smiled, believing the mystery had finally ended. Then my husband quietly walked into the living room holding something I had never seen before. It was an old voice recorder. He looked at me with gentle, uncertain eyes. I think. He whispered, "There's something on here you need to hear." My heart stopped. Because the recorder had my name written on it. In my own handwriting. I finally answered. What if the voice that haunted your nights was never trying to frighten you? What if it had been protecting you all along? As I held the old recorder in my hands, every whisper, every sleepless night, every unexplained moment suddenly felt connected. I wasn't searching for a ghost anymore. I was searching for the woman I used to be before life became louder than my own heart. The final answer was waiting inside that tiny recorder, and once I pressed play, nothing about my life would ever feel the same again. My husband quietly placed the recorder on the kitchen table. I found it while cleaning the garage, he said. I don't remember seeing it before. Neither did I. The small label attached to it simply read, Emma. I took a slow breath and pressed the play button. Static filled the room for a few seconds. Then I heard a familiar voice. It was mine. Not today's voice. An older recording. Gentler. More hopeful. If you're listening to this, the recording began, it means life probably became too busy again. I covered my mouth. I had completely forgotten making it. My recorded voice continued. Please don't ignore yourself. Your family doesn't need a woman who never cries. They need a woman who is present. If you ever feel lost, stop, breathe, and listen. Tears rolled down my face. Every mysterious whisper suddenly made sense. Not because there had been a supernatural explanation, but because my own mind had been desperately trying to bring me back to promises I had once made to myself. Months of emotional exhaustion, endless responsibilities, and quiet loneliness had buried those promises beneath routine. The whispers became a symbol of my inner voice refusing to disappear. Researchers have long shown that chronic stress can narrow our attention until we focus only on problems and responsibilities. At the same time, gentle daily habits, mindful breathing, meaningful conversations, reflective journaling, and slow language practice can gradually restore emotional balance. Looking back, my nightly slow English reading sessions were never only about improving English. They gave me permission to slow down long enough to hear what I had been avoiding. From that day forward, small things began to change. Not dramatic things. Real things. My husband and I started taking evening walks without our phones. We ate dinner together without rushing. We asked each other one simple question every night. How are you really? Sometimes the answers were joyful. Sometimes they were difficult. But they were always honest. I continued listening to slow English stories before bed. This time, every sentence carried two meanings. I practiced English little by little while reminding myself to live a little more slowly. One of my favorite sentences became, I choose peace. I repeated it every evening. I choose peace. Eventually, I no longer needed whispers to remind me. I had learned to hear myself. One quiet Sunday morning, sunlight filled our living room. My children laughed while making pancakes with my husband, somehow creating another beautifully imperfect breakfast. I stood by the window smiling, realizing that happiness had not arrived because my life became flawless. It arrived because I stopped pretending I had to be flawless. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. Inside, everything was different. Before putting the recorder away forever, I listened to the final seconds one last time. There was one sentence I had never reached before. If you're smiling again, you finally answered. I smiled through tears. Yes, I whispered. I finally did. And if there is one thing I hope you carry with you after hearing my story, it is this: sometimes the quietest voice is not your enemy. Sometimes it is the part of you that refuses to let you disappear beneath stress, fear, or silence. Listen to it with kindness. Speak to yourself with patience. Love your family with honesty. And never be afraid to answer when your own heart gently calls your name. That is all for today. I'll be creating many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next one.